whenever a new extreme event happens, it just, I think for most of us that work in climate science, hit us like really hard because it's something that it wouldn't happen maybe. And it's happening so often and so frequent, and the governments are still refusing to do something. So it's like, what needs to happen for the people who can make the difference to do it? And it's very, it's everything. It's sad, it's frustrating, it's sometimes you cannot avoid to but feel like hopeless, like really like what needs to happen.
Welcome to today's conversation with Facing Future TV. I'm your host, Raya Salter. Hundreds of the world's leading climate scientists expect global temperatures to rise to at least 2.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels this century, blasting intentionally agreed targets and causing catastrophic consequences for humanity and the planet. So The Guardian asked 380 of the world's top climate scientists about this. The scientists responded, hopeless, infuriated, scared by the world's failure to act. "We live in an age of fools," said one scientist. Another responded, "I'm relieved that I don't have children, knowing what the future holds." Today, we're going to talk to one of those scientists featured in the article and how she feels about climate crisis and the world's response. Dr. Ruth Cerezo-Mota is an Oxford-trained climatologist and researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. With more than 15 years' experience working with regional climate models and for the study of extreme precipitation events and interannual variability of rain and temperature in Mexico. She's also a lead author of Chapter 8 of the IPCC Working Group 6 Assessment Report. This is where the world's scientists assess the available scientific information on climate change. Welcome, Dr. Cerezo-Mota.
Hi, thank you.
So this article was really something. Really, hundreds of our world's top scientists, including yourself, said that when thinking about the climate crisis, they're left feeling hopeless, infuriated, scared because governments refuse to act. In fact, you told The Guardian that at times this situation has left you feeling, hopeless and broken. Could you talk about the toll on yourself and climate scientists because of these of this situation?
Yeah, well, as you said in the introduction, I work with extreme events here in Mexico, and it's not just in Mexico that we are experiencing heat waves. For example, right now in the States, and Mexico is experiencing a heat wave. We have experienced in the last 3-4 years fires everywhere, flooding, and leaving a toll of damages and people dying because of some events that might be not happen if it weren't for us, if the governments have taken actions before. We have been saying this for more than 30 years. The IPCC is 30 years old. No, 35, I think so. The first report came in 1990. So it's not that the governments didn't know before, it's that we didn't know this before. So it's very, whenever a new extreme event happens, it just, I think for most of us that work in climate science, hit us like really hard because it's something that it wouldn't happen maybe. And it's happening so often and so frequent, and the governments are still refusing to do something. The negotiations just happened last week in Bonn that should settle like the pace for the negotiations on COP. And there were no much more advanced. So it's like, what needs to happen for the people who can make the difference to do it? And it's very, it's everything. It's sad, it's frustrating, it's sometimes you cannot avoid to but feel like hopeless, like really like what needs to happen.
What you're saying is super powerful, and sometimes it feels like what will make folks act, will it be actually experiencing these things that are happening? I know just this week in the United States, they've issued a major heat warning. And it's so many cities. It's going to be the Midwest, it's the South, it's New York. We're going to be seeing, 100, 105-degree temperatures, which are really unseasonal. And folks are going to have to live through this. I mean, one wonders, is it going to take people actually feeling these disastrous effects before folks are willing to act?
The thing that I don't understand, I understand, maybe at the beginning, 30, let's say that the story started 30 years ago, and there was these people from, big oil company, Exxon and Chevron and all those guys and making money. And then when we started to talk about climate change, and because there was these intermissions from these lobbyists in the negotiations, so it was not that clear, the message that it was fossil fuels and global warming linked together. So I can understand at the beginning, because we're talking about climate change by the end of the century. So 2000, many people, myself, I'm not going to be alive by the end of the century. So many people okay, it's not a priority. It's nothing that I need to do something right now. But then with this last report, we are noticing that these events are happening more frequent now because of climate change and global warming. And now we're realizing that this 1.5 degrees that was the limit for the Paris Agreement is not going to be by the end of the century. It's going to be in 6 to 5 years now. And if we reach 1.5, it's going to have tremendous consequences, bad consequences. And we are getting close and closer, really close to that should be the limit. And now it's we are very likely are going to pass that, and the consequences are going to be worse. So I sort of get it, many years ago, they didn't understand the emergency of the situation. But right now we are seeing everywhere. It's not oh yeah, it's the poor people there in Latin America or there in Africa. It's everywhere, Canada, the States, Europe. And of course, it's not the same as flooding in Germany, where they have more resilience, that the same flooding here in Mexico, that we may not have the same resilience. It takes longer and have another consequences. But we are already seeing people migrating because of climate change, and we are going to move to places that seems safe. So it's very likely that migration towards Europe or towards the States are going to increase just because of climate change. And it's not that in the States it's not going to happen anything, because as you said, it's happening now. You're experiencing a heat wave, and it's going to take consequences in agricultural, in energy, health. So climate change touches everything. It is related up with everything, and we need to act as well, everybody, but the people who has the power need to act faster and take us to the way where we can avoid the worst of it.
The article talked about that the world is expected to heat by 3 degrees C this century. I know that sounds really abstract to folks. What does that mean? What can we expect to see?
Well, we know now, with each 1 degree of increment in temperature at global level, that makes that events like heat waves, floodings, hurricanes, droughts became more intense and more frequent. So with each degree, we are increasing the probability for those extreme events to happen, even in places where we never experienced it. And if they happen, will be stronger, more intense. We know that now because there's a lot of studies everywhere in the world, and we are seeing that this increment in frequent and intensity. We know as well that when we talk about 1.5 or 2 degrees or 3 degrees, it doesn't mean that, for example, here in the place where I'm living, I live in Merida, it doesn't mean that it's going to be an increase of 3 degrees in the temperature. It's not, because that's the global average. But what it means that the average is going to be 3 degrees, but it happens for example, the projections for Mexico is if we reach a level of 3 degrees global, for Mexico, it might imply 6 to 7 degrees more than we are experiencing now. So for example, I live in Merida, and we just experienced a heat wave as well in the rest of the country. But there was one day that we reached 47 degrees Celsius. And there is this index that is called the heat index, that it relates temperature and humidity. So if this is very humid, the environment, it makes the feeling of that temperature higher. So that makes
Yeah.
much more uncomfortable the situation that if it's dry and warm.
What kind of things, like say specifically where you live and you see that type of elevated heat, and we see that if that starts to happen, what types of local impacts does that have?
It has a lot of impacts because first of all, it makes more clear the disadvantage, for example, for poor people. Like me, for example, if it's really warm, I can turn on my air conditioner. I have one. I have one in my office if I go to my office. I work in an office. I work with my computer. I don't have to work outside. Whereas if you, for example, work, I don't know, cleaning houses, it might be that in the house that you're cleaning, there is no air conditioner. You have to walk maybe, or you have to take the public transportation, and no all public transportation, at least here in Merida, has air conditioner. Or if you have to walk in under these really high temperatures. So it's risk of dehydration, or people who work, building houses. And I don't know why here at least in Merida is not something like illegal that to make people work outside with this level of temperatures. Maybe they can work during the night. I don't know. But I don't think that laws are thinking that, and that thinking that these things are going to get worse. And it also has like implications, even if you are like really wealthy and you have money to pay electricity bills and to have air conditioner in all your rooms, if you are not that healthy, these high temperatures put your body to a really strong, heavy stress. And because, for example, here during the heat wave, the minimum temperatures were above the average body temperature. So that means that your body effectively never get a proper rest during these peaks of temperature. It's also an implication, for example, in most of Mexico, all the agricultural sector is seasonal. So it depends on rainfall, and it depends how the seasons happens. So if instead of having a normal spring, you are having really, really hot spring, it may damage all the agricultural. So we may have problems to produce enough food, for example. Also, the electricity demand is higher, so the electric grid is not strong enough to support everybody turning on the air conditioners. Kids, for example, in the school, it might be that you're lucky enough and your school, because it's a wealthy school, have air conditioner in your classroom. But if it's not and you don't have, so imagine having to pay attention to your professor, to your teacher, whilst it's super hot. So that makes, again, like, it creates more disadvantage for people who does not have proper access. So these kids, for example, is going to get left behind because these kids that have money and all the resources, they can keep going to school and learning, whereas these kids, no. So it has a lot of consequences, like in short term and in long term.
It's interesting. It's funny. I just saw one of the young people had posted a TikTok about air conditioning, and like it's interesting the role of air conditioning and privilege. Her post was like, hey, folks are way too used to air conditioning. The fact that you go to the mall and need to put on a sweater when it's 110 degrees outside. And to your point about the schools, and that's the other thing I think folks take for granted, and thinking that, grids are going to be able to just produce as much electricity to heat things as the temperatures go higher and higher. As somebody who focuses on energy, I used to work with our New York City utility, Con Edison. People don't realize when the heat goes up in the summer, they don't realize how hard it is for the utility to keep the power on. In fact, every summer in Con Ed, they have like a huge control room. And when it gets hot, folks like literally stay up 24 hours monitoring the situation, all the teams. It's like an extreme emergency event to keep the power going. Folks don't realize. The thing about the school, folks also don't realize, parts of the island that are already, which of course are the lower income parts of the island that are hotter than they used to be. Folks didn't have air conditioned buildings. And now it gets so hot that the children are dehydrated and they can't study. And folks don't understand that that's true in a lot of places. It's true in New York City. We've got all these big public school buildings that aren't built for air conditioning. Why? Because during the school year, you don't usually need it. So it's just interesting that role of air conditioning and privilege, and just sort of how folks are just blind
Yeah.
to the fact that this is something that's going to impact all of us.
And also, if everybody were as wealthy to own their own air conditioner, then if you think the impacts, because to have air conditioner, that means that you have to, use electricity. And for example, in Mexico, we heavily depend on fossil fuels. So that means more.
Yep.
More CO2, which in turn is going to increase the temperature, which, is like a vicious loop. And then to cool down, you need to produce heat somewhere. So it's making like worse. But the solution cannot be, for example, for the government to say, okay, I'm going to give everybody an air conditioner for their houses, because that's not going to solve in the long term the situation. Actually, it's going to make it worse.
And that's exactly what's been happening in New York City. As it gets hot and people are living in apartment buildings, and look, like, I get it. We need an elderly person is hot and they can't survive. They need an air conditioner. But that's literally what's been happening, is we've been giving folks air conditioners so they can live in the short term. Like you said, the vicious cycles that and short-term solutions that we find ourselves grappling with. I want to ask you again, getting back to the article. I mean, I think for, an Oxford-trained scientist like yourself to just respond saying hopelessness and despair, like, tell us a bit more about, I'm just interested to hear more about your feelings about this.
As I said, I have worked for many years with climate change, but not specific climate change, but extreme events, but they are related. So anywhere by the time that I got, there was this open call to participate in the previous report of the IPCC. So I volunteered myself, thinking, I'm not going to get it, but let's pretend. I really never expect to be selected anyway. So I got the invitation and I was super happy. And I started to talk with some friends. And one of them, she asked me like, but do you get like therapy or something like that? Yeah, I was laughing at that point, like, why would I need therapy? I mean, what are you talking about? And she said, well, because you're dealing with climate change on the daily basis, so it can be like too much. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So that was at the very beginning, like 2018. I was still like pretty normal. It's not that I'm not normal now, but I'm a little, I'm a broken toy, probably.
I know what you mean. You're like, just sort of like going along, maybe naive, maybe more resilient, maybe normal. Yeah.
And by 2000, so the IPCC is a great opportunity for your career. You learn, I mean, what I taken from being part of the IPCC is how much I learn of many, many, many things. How much I get to know really wonderful people, how much I learn from female leaders how to lead by the example. So there's a lot of good things that I got from being part of the IPCC. But the truth is the pressure and the work that you have to be and have to done during 3 or almost 4 years is take a toll. So, the IPCC is divided in 3 groups. I work in group 1, that is the physical basis. So why it's getting warm or why we are seeing more extreme events, that sort of things. So in 2019, I think so, there was a meeting where authors from the 3 groups were chosen because we have to design the outline for the last part of the report, that is the synthesis report. So that's the last bit of the IPCC cycle. And then in that meeting, we start to talk, because there was people from my group, from mitigation, people from adaptation, and then you start to listen all these things that happen. So once that there is an higher temperatures, or if there is a flooding, so what happened across all the sectors. And then I started to realize, like, oh yeah, I mean, it's bad. It's not that I understand the physics of how we have a heat wave, but it's like, okay, we understand that. But then what happened and the impacts everywhere, biodiversity, human, agriculture, everything. So I start to connect all the dots. And I think for me, that was the breaking point, because I realized that it's not just about talking 1.5 or 2 degrees. So what really will happen if we reach those points, and then start to, to pay attention to everything around me, and seeing that we indeed are experiencing more extreme events, like here where I'm living, because Merida is one of the safest principal city in Mexico. There's a lot of migration, that's not the problem. The problem is that the city is growing without any planning or design. So they're removing the vegetation to build houses, and it's getting warmer. So we are losing the protection from the trees and the vegetation. We are experiencing floodings because this heavy rainfall that we have. So first we have a heat wave, and now we are having floodings. So things are happening all around us, and I start to connect the dots. And I think at that point, I don't know if I get depressed, but I was barely functioning and working, and it was a very dark moment for me.
It's funny because I kind of also share that feeling or experience. It's like when you start to get involved in this field, and you're like, yay, like I'm gonna, it's a profession, like you think about your career and you're sort of like in a way, it's like the personal benefits. I mean, we are looking to put ourselves and our purpose towards the betterment. We're trying to apply ourselves, but you start wading in and realizing, is it almost like, wait a minute, this is an emergency. This is not, this is not about me getting a promotion, or like we are in a dire emergency, and people just don't seem to be grasping it. They don't seem to understand exactly how bad it is.
As I said, for example, when we used to talk about climate change, it was by the end of this century, so look very in the future, or we thought, yeah, that's going to mean that the North Pole and the South Pole is going to, melt down. So, yeah, that's sad, but that's there, in the poles. Like, yeah, I mean, I think in the polar bears, and yeah, it's sad. I mean, I'm poor polar bears. But I think people are realizing, like, really clear that it's not there far away in the time. It's not there far away in the world. It's just at the door of your house. It's happening like now. We are experiencing these extreme events everywhere now. So I think people are as well, even if they don't understand the physics, they are realizing that we're experiencing hottest weather now, and each month is hotter than the previous, and the people like nowadays, like they're talking like, I don't remember that it was normal to have these sort of temperatures, or it is normal to have this heavy precipitation now. Or, I mean, there is a seasonality even for fires, like when there happen, like in the natural cycle, there's a seasonality for fires. And there are places that will normally experience fires in a very specific season of the year. But now it's happening, like these fires like are happening all across the world in places where it shouldn't happen. So people like, I don't remember that we used to have fires. So I think people now, they are as well connecting the dots, and they might not understand the physics or how is, fossil fuels to blame for, but they're understanding, they're seeing changes in their own places, in their own time. No, it's not like, I remember that my grandmother. No, it's like,
no, that's right.
In my lifetime, I'm experiencing all these changes, and I seen like they're outside of my house, and I think that's true for most of the people. So the problem when you talk about climate change, it's difficult to talk because you have to understand like the physics, at least the bare minimum, and then you need to talk about the consequences, which are bad. So if you, like, for example, you live paycheck by paycheck, you may not have the energy or to talk about these sort of things. And like, I don't care, and I need to
actually, let me ask you, because you talked about when you have this window at a scientific level on what's really happening and how hard it is to explain that and how people aren't grasping it. You told me that you've done some work and that you're doing some work really for more popular understanding and education about these topics. Explain a little bit about that.
Well, for this cycle of the IPCC, I was the only Mexican for working group 1, and I was the only actually from all Central America. So by the time that the report was released, so 2021, I think so, I got a lot of attention from the media because I was the only one, I mean, here in Mexico, because I was the only one from Mexico. And the good thing about that people start to contact me to invite me to different sort of forums and talks, like from hospitals, from I don't know, schools, high school, universities. So I started to talk about the results of IPCC. And in one of those invitations, one of those places that I was invited, I get to know a guy, which is very involved in activism and stuff like that. And he has his own group, and he connected me with them. So we work in something for Mexico. So we produce this. This is a manual talking about climate change, but really simple terms. It's in Spanish. So the idea was for the general audience to have some material. Like if you want, like for example, I give my talk and try to explain in the simplest way why we are in this situation and how the consequences that we might experience. So that's give you like, like the basic. But if you want to learn a little bit more or okay, now I understand we are in an emergency, so what can I do? So there's also some proposals here, like, for example, get involved in activism. One, because I think it's sort of therapeutical. And second, because then you get to know more people like yourself and they want to do something. And, the more people participate, the bigger is the consequence, the action, the reaction. Get informed, because if you don't get informed, then you don't know that you should be demanding to your governments to take action.
That's
like,
right.
for example, if you see something illegal in terms of environment, like for example, someone removing the vegetation and it looks like dodgy. So what can I do? Like, where is the government or the office that I should be sending the evidence of what I'm seeing? So, to get involved. So yeah, it's tough to talk about climate change. And we have to do it, but we also have to provide the tools for the people to don't get just stupidly depressed. I mean, yes, it's sad, it is bad. Now we know that. So now let's get to do something like we cannot just get depressed and do nothing. So, okay. So we try to provide like that information, like this is the scenario for Mexico. This is what it might look if we don't do anything. And this is what you can do if you want to do
That's
something.
right.
So it's in very simple terms. It's like really like, I think it's like 30 pages or less, 30 pages exactly. And you can download it from the web and you have the information there in your hands. So again, just for people to be informed and also for people to don't say that I didn't know. So ignorance cannot be an excuse.
You can't say that I didn't tell you. It sounds like digging into the science and the reality of where we are can bring somebody to a really dark place. And it seems like one of the ways out, is to keep fighting and to just keep spreading the word to more and more people. Would you say that's the case, or how do you deal with this?
Yes, for me that was so when I was like in the worst of the moments, several of my colleagues from the IPCC, from my chapter, because I was not even able to reply emails because I get panic attacks. And anyway, so at some point, 3 of them, they wrote me just the subject of the email was, please just let us know that you are okay, because I was in the middle of COVID as well. So they were worried about like maybe like she's already dead because of COVID. We don't know. So that sort of bring me up like, okay, I mean, I'm not alone. I'm making people to feel worried about me, and that's not okay because everybody has to deal with COVID, with their own problems. So it's not fair. I talk with them, and then they say that they were as well, like maybe not as depressed or maybe not as bad as I was, but they were like, yeah, worried. And what they thought was like, okay, this is we as academia, we can do, we have to do the work, we have to produce this information, we have to produce these reports so that people will be informed. So this is how we can contribute, like really, like because we are the ones that are working with this, so we can produce this information, we can give this information to the people, and like information is power. So we can empower the people, and we have to do it because someone has to do it. And we were already chosen to do it for the IPCC. So I promised myself then that I will speak with whoever wanted to talk about climate change. And that was my contribution. So and that's why I was invited to give so many talks, because I always say yes, because this is the way I think that you can disseminate the information. So I know that I say that, here is 30 pages, read it, but not everybody knows. First of all, not everybody knows what's the IPCC, what's the materials that you can download. And then if you see like these huge documents, it's like, man, I'm not going to read that. So I think this is the way for the people to get to know that there is material for them to read. Even in the official website of the IPCC, there is something that's called the Summary for All. So if you Google Summary for All IPCC, it's going to appear. The first link that you can see is very simple terms. But again, not everybody knows about this. So whenever I get an invitation, like, can you give us a talk? High school, universities, governments, I say yes. And this is what I feel that I can do. So the people can be informed, and you may get like a little bit worried, but then my hope is that by talking about this, and if you get worried, then you get interested in doing something, and you get to know that we are still on time to do something.
That's it. I think that's really important, because it's only going to, as the example you mentioned, it's only going to get sort of harder as our circumstances and the heat and all the problems will only make it harder to act. Even if we are projected to blow past limits, like the answer is still that we can do something, and we must do something now. I want to say thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cerezo Mota, today. And thanks everybody to our audience. Thank you for watching another conversation with Facing Future TV.